Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Joining Forces, Tapping Teacher Specialists to Serve All Students. My name is Sarah Dockery-Sparks, and I'm an assistant editor here at EdWeek. Underwriting for today's webinar has been provided by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The Every Student Succeeds Act gives states and districts a lot of new flexibility to experiment with ways to help all students learn. Today we'll be talking with education leaders from Adams County 50 in Westminster, Colorado, on how they're using a flexible new approach to student services to support students within a proficiency-based system and dramatically improve schools. With us today is Steve Sandoval, Executive Director of Special Services for Adams County and member of our class of 2016 Leaders to Learn From. With him also is Chad Anderson, principal at Scott Carpenter Middle School in Adams County, and Sarah Gould, principal of Hodgkins Elementary School in Adams County. Before we get started, I want to touch on a few technical details. Please check the audio setting on your computer as well as your speaker volume settings if you're having any audio trouble. If you're still having issues, please see our detailed audio troubleshooting file available in the handouts folder at the bottom of the console. There are also some icons that open additional feature panels in our webinar console. You can read about today's speakers in the bio panel, click the handouts panel to download a copy of today's slides, and follow the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter using the hashtag EWWebinar. Finally, an on-demand archive of today's presentation will be available online in the next 24 hours. Both the archive and a free-to-download version of the PowerPoint slides will be accessible through edweek.org. And you can follow our continuing coverage of the Leaders to Learn From over the coming months. Now I'd like to hand the presentation over to Steve. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and hi, everyone, and greetings from Westminster, Colorado. Before we get started, I'd like to thank EdWeek for hosting this webcast event to a broader audience. I mean, the pleasure is all ours, for sure. As mentioned by Sarah, my name is Steve Sandoval, and I serve as the Executive Director of Special Services who oversees special ed in Section 504 for Adams County School District 50. I've also invited two colleagues of mine, as you heard before, Dr. Sarah Gould, who's the principal at Hodgkins Elementary School, and Mr. Chad Anderson, who's the principal at Scott Carpenter Middle School, who later on will give you a taste of how they're actually actualizing this work, our Interventionist Framework, and implementing it within their schools. Now, as you can see, the title of my talk is Joining Forces, Tapping into Teacher Specialists to Support All Students. This talk will not be about curriculum or methodology, but rather more of a philosophical approach for creating a culture for all. There are a lot of successful stories out there, but this is our story. And our goal today is to stimulate thought or ideas and how you might tackle some of these multifaceted issues within your own district or organization. We've all heard the expression, all ships must rise with the tide, and this certainly is our goal here at Adams 50. We want no school stuck in the mud of isolation and mediocrity. The fact is, no one can do this hard work alone, and we need everyone to pull his or her weight in order to impact outcomes for kids. Our Interventionist Framework is a paradigm that provides wraparound support for students needing the most help from a variety of educators. It also views all students as complex human beings and who have a complex array of needs, not ones that can easily fit into a bucket. And it allows a flexibility among its special programs to match this complex array. I'll talk more in depth about these ideas later on. But first, without boring you with my life story, I thought it would be important to tell you a little bit about myself. After all, you're spending part of your busy day with me and us, and so you may be wondering who I am as a person and as an educator. To start, I've always had a passion for children, even when I was a child myself. And the photos of me with my younger cousins, like you see here, were pretty commonplace. That's some pretty big 80s hair. Anyhow, my parents, aunts, grandparents, they often remarked how comfortable and protective I was of our youngest family members when I was a kid as well. I also recall in 7th grade when our home ec teacher asked us what we wanted to do when we grew up. I was the weird kid who yelled out child psychologist when all my other friends and classmates shouted policeman, teacher, fireman, football player, or even breakdancer. I'm aging myself. Well, I didn't become a child psychologist. Instead, I became a school psychologist, which I did for 5 years, and I enjoyed immensely. However, my passion for kids led me toward wanting to make a larger impact beyond the individual students I met on a regular basis. I wanted to contribute to a grander purpose for kids' sake, and that was through educational leadership. So I enrolled in a special ed director's license program, and soon thereafter I began my administrative career in 2001 as a pupil services specialist, emphasizing in special ed programs. My first directorship position was in a small northern Colorado school district in 2003, which it turns out became a watershed moment for me professionally, and I'll explain that a little bit later. I was in that small district for 5 years before I started my current work here at Adams County School District 50. And contributing professionally, advocating for students with special needs beyond my school district has always been important to me. So I've done that by participating in a variety of boards and advisories really to accomplish that need. And today I absolutely love my work and my district. And like everywhere else, it's certainly not without its daily challenges. But at least we're no longer where we were in 2008. In 2008, I had just been hired as director to contribute leading out our district's new competency-based system, or CBS, but from the lens of special services, that is special ed and gifted ed. Our district at the time and currently was a highly impacted one, primarily composed of students deemed at risk. In fact, we don't have an affluent school in our system. All our schools are impacted with high poverty and a high culturally and linguistically diverse, or CLD, student population, which are really strengths as well. At that time, Adams 50 was deemed a turnaround district by the Colorado Department of Education, which means that we performed below the 5th percentile when it compared to other districts statewide. We certainly had a huge mountain to climb. Our unrelenting sense of urgency was what was needed to turn our district around. We knew that we couldn't climb this mountain by simply touching around the edges of change. We needed to transform ourselves if we had any hope of improving student outcomes for all. And without getting into the details about how we went about establishing our competency-based system, since that's not what this talk is all about, our culture and practices shifted dramatically. We suddenly began creating a personalized learning profile for each student, not just for students with IEPs or advanced learning plans. And since each student learns certain content at different paces, we needed to create a fluid and dynamic process for moving students from one performance level to the next when they earned it. We would often say learning was the constant and time was the variable, and anytime, anywhere learning, which really meant that seat time toward graduation was no longer going to be the acceptable way of doing things. To do so, it was also crucial that teachers provided learner-centered practices, not teacher-directed ones. We had to ensure that all teachers and interventionists across the district were working from a guaranteed and viable curriculum so that teaching practices were consistent and articulated across all our performance levels. Now, as I mentioned, this is not a talk about a competency-based system. However, talking about our interventionist framework as a separate entity to our competency-based system is not only very difficult to do, it really wouldn't give you an accurate picture of what we're all about. They both go together like kind of biscuits and gravy. Now, this next slide illustrates how far we've come, I think, as a district over the span of 6 years based on academic achievement, academic growth, closing the gap, and post-secondary readiness. Without going into too much detail, what's most important is to see the color changes that we've made over the years since we started the competency-based model in our interventionist framework, with red and orange colors being least desirable and yellow and green colors being most desirable. In fact, we're the only turnaround district in Colorado that have seen this type of improvement progression during the same time frame. Clearly, we have a lot of work to do to reach our goals, but we're really encouraged by the data as well. And thankfully, we are no longer tagged with that deplorable moniker of turnaround, which vanished in 2012. Nowadays, anyone can pick up a newspaper or Education Week article or whatever and read the challenges that are displayed in front of us as educators. We read about teacher shortages in special education, as well as for those who teach English learners. We also know that achievement trends for students with disabilities have been flat over the last several years, despite the fact that revenues and expenditures for addressing their needs have been increasing. I mean, if this were a business model, we would have trashed it long ago and started over. We also deal with sizable legislative demands, such as burdensome testing requirements and the continuous cycle of unfunded mandates, which have taken away from instruction and teacher creativity in the classroom. Further, a generational gap exists between our students and teachers, which certainly is not a new reality. And simply put, many of our students today learn differently than how they're being taught. There's a disconnect, which can be a problem if not addressed head-on. However, not all our current educational realities are doom and gloom either. Knowing the student-teacher divide can also lend itself for opportunities to engage and teach students differently and in more meaningful ways. We have the knowledge and the technology to make that happen. We also know that working effectively together in collaboration, not in isolation or in silos, leads to improved student performance. We're also hearing the winds of change from the state and federal officials that their shift from compliance to outcomes in improving flexibility for consolidating and blending supports, services, accountability requirements, and even funding. Finally, and this is no comprehensive list by any means, but having competent children who actually demonstrate understanding of content or perform an observable skill is gaining traction nationwide. It's not enough to say that kids are earning A's or B's in school anymore. Those grade designations are often subjective and inconsistently applied. Students now have to show what they know. As I mentioned earlier, if special services were a business model, we would have scrapped it long ago and started something new, something better, something more universal in its design for all students. And as one who has dedicated his life to this field as both a practitioner and now as a special ed leader, it's been hard to finally realize that special education in this country is an old paradigm. And as educational leaders, it's about time we admit that to ourselves, which we know is the first step to any 12-step program. It's a paradigm that has gone relatively unchanged for 4 decades. In fact, this school year culminates the 40-year anniversary of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, originally introduced in 1975 as PL 94-142. It's an old reality. In 1995, Fuchs and Fuchs wrote an important paper titled "What's So Special About Special Education?" They argued that special education encouraged segregation and offers students a watered-down curriculum, and in fact, students with disabilities receive less instruction, not more, when compared to their non-disabled peers. Now, in 2016, over 20 years after this critical article was written, has special education changed much? Well, segregation is still occurring for far too many of our students who don't need that level of self-containment. And furthermore, students are often stigmatized. Litigation has skyrocketed. The program is costly and inefficient. The paperwork bureaucracy has increased tenfold, and instruction is often unaligned to core instruction. Also, student outcomes are flat. Special ed turnover continues to be problematic, and therefore our students with disabilities are often placed in programs taught by our least experienced teachers. I've heard parents liken special education placement to a prison sentence, where once you're in, you can't get out. Now, I don't know about you, but anytime any program is associated with incarceration, we need to do something differently. Now, don't get me wrong. Certainly advances in technology and equipment for students with disabilities have vastly improved over the last 40 years, which is providing students better access to their general ed programs than ever before. Initial special ed legislation in 1975, it got kids out of dreary institutions as well as from homes that were oftentimes unstimulating and into schools, where their lives suddenly became more stimulating and engaging. It also put provisions into the law for ensuring that all students, disabled or not, are receiving a free and appropriate public education. And to the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities are being educated and socialized with their non-disabled classmates. It talked about looking at each child with a disability as a unique individual requiring a unique set of learning priorities while receiving a unique array of personalized services. It clearly gave these children a voice where none was had before. And for these reasons, we will always be grateful for this landmark legislation. However, despite its many benefits for students with disabilities, special education somehow has lost its way. So what's been special about special education? Well, I'm holding out for something better. But special education as an institution is not alone. Similar might be said about all state or federal education programs we call CLD education, gifted and talented education, and Title I as well. Across the country, they too are siloed, prescriptive, and far too compliance heavy. For several years, scholars, educators, and authors have asked how we can fix the issue of special education. In fact, author Miriam Friedman, who I believe is listening today, has argued that we need something different, something transformative, a special ed 2.0. But how? First, we need to look at universal education, or Tier 1, or first best instruction. When it comes to this topic, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 2004 has an interesting take. Having a disability alone does not qualify a student with a disability. Only when the disability prevents the student from achieving in general education are they eligible for special education. And also, education case law, I believe this came from Hawaii, has offered a standard as well. A student with an impairment can learn and perform in a regular classroom without specially designed instruction. The fact that his health impairment may have a minimal adverse effect does not render him eligible for special education. In other words, whether it be done through a competency-based system or a traditional one, if general education is good enough to address the vast needs of our students with or without intervention support, then fixing special education may actually happen by improving general education. Now, as you recall, I mentioned something about my watershed moment professionally when I became a director of special programs in 2003 for a small school district in northern Colorado. Well, in most small school districts in Colorado, central office directors wear several hats, and I was no exception. Although my expertise was in special education, I was also charged to oversee gifted education, CLD education, crisis management, and believe it or not, I even served as the district's expulsion hearing officer for students who did not have IEPs. Since my learning curve was quite steep when it came to CLD and GT leadership, I read almost anything I could get my hands on, and I attended almost every workshop that crossed my desk just to get caught up to speed. During my first year there, I spent a great deal of time observing small group sessions by CLD specialists, GT teachers, and even Title I teachers. And it was then that I had an epiphany. What I observed was that the best specialists simply provided darn good teaching, whether it be done through pull-out, push-in, or co-teaching. I observed a CLD specialist teach a small group vocabulary lesson to a group of CLD students at one point, and then right next door I would watch a Title I teacher teach another vocabulary lesson with her group of struggling learners. In fact, if I were to close my eyes and just simply listen to the instruction taking place between those two classrooms, I wouldn't have been able to decipher their differences. I wondered which students were getting both lessons from both teachers without either specialist even knowing. It was then that I realized the line between intervention, like Title I, and services, CLD, was rather a fine one. Sure, many students with more significant intellectual, physical, or behavioral needs required specialized transportation services, motor services, adaptive PE services, and behavioral planning. However, from a purely academic standpoint, which is where most outcomes are going to occur, there was very little difference between high-quality intervention groups and high-quality service groups. In my mind, they were just simply high-impact groups. Further, there was no magic each specialist was doing with their students in their workspaces. Sure, some utilized different techniques learned from their teacher-trainer programs, but they certainly weren't methods that couldn't be learned by other talented staff. Ultimately, student achievement outcomes, regardless of label, family circumstance, or challenge of any kind, came down to high-quality instruction to its very core. Talk about tapping into your teacher specialist. Well, this was it. It also made me wonder why on earth we would have distinct specialist endorsements from college and university programs. Were those distinctions created primarily to address compliance purposes or pedagogical ones? I wasn't sure anymore. In any case, it was this energy I observed in those schools that I wanted to harness so that we can create a true collaborative model of teaching. But doing so wasn't going to be easy. I might even get my hand slapped from a compliance lens, but I felt it was worth the effort if it meant student growth was going to occur. At that time in the early to mid-2000s, another rather curious educational concept or practice was attracting attention among special ed circles nationwide. And can you guess what that was? Yes, response to intervention, or RTI, now regarded as multi-tiered system of support. Although at that time it had not yet been formally introduced in any legal document, after all, the 2004 reauthorization of IDEA didn't come out until the following year, it was creating quite a buzz among special educators nationwide. Although RTI implementation was still in its infancy, conceptually its tenets about the importance of providing universal screening for all children, teaching high-quality instruction at all 3 tier levels, and monitoring student progress along was very exciting at that time. This, many of us felt, was going to be transformative. However, admittedly, my relationship with RTI back then had become a love-hate one. I loved RTI conceptually, and I was a champion for it both at the district and state level. I loved that it helped reinforce my newfound epiphany in how specialists, like special educators, GT, CLD, and Title I teachers, can blend their talents together to intervene with students who need it most. However, in practice, I was frustrated with the fact that RTI had become a special ed responsibility, despite many attempts to communicate otherwise. That it was not embedded within the general ed system, but layered upon it, that although the silos between specialists were starting to break down, there was still a distinct chasm between the specialists and the classroom teachers. And because of these barriers, it wasn't giving us the growth outcomes we had hoped. But when I learned in 2008 that Adams 50 was embarking upon a competency-based system, I immediately surmised that we could learn from RTI literature, build upon it, and create a framework that, with thoughtful professional dialogue and planning, could dovetail nicely with our new system. This, in combination with our competency-based system, was an approach I felt could transform education for all students. As you can see, our interventionist vision and mission, formally developed in 2010, guides the culture of our work among interventionists across the district. To not view students as overly simplistic labels, but as complex beings who come to us with a variety of needs. When initial ideas began swirling in our heads on how we can embed interventions and services for focused students in a competency-based system, I, along with Cindy Davis, who was the Title I director back then, is now as a principal at one of our elementary schools, and David Patton, who was the CLD coach back then, began discussing our initial values, which has shaped our vision, even though it had not yet been formally actualized at that time. So some of those things we see here were that students are complex, as we mentioned. They're dynamic, and they're ever evolving. It's not stagnant. They don't really fit into a nice, neat bucket. We also felt that strengths really do matter, that no longer should we see education as simply a deficit model. It was important that interventions supplement the work that's being done in the classroom, not to supplant it, because our content experts are really teaching in our general ed classrooms, and that was really important to do. That we needed to support all students. Oftentimes, unfortunately, our gifted and talented students are ignored in these types of discussions. We needed to pull them into this discussion as well. Important to cross-pollinate our roles a little bit, to kind of blur the lines professionally with how we do so we can support student needs based on our strengths as educators. To really get rid of the one-size-fits-all mentality for students at all levels. It doesn't mean that IEPs or 504 plans or CLD plans, for that matter, go away. We still have special ed programs and CLD programs for kids that really, really need that. But it blurs the lines somewhat more in terms of how we provide those services through intervention and services. This graphic describes our collaboration model, whereas you can see at the very top are our various students that we would consider focused students. These are our IEP students, ELD, now called CLD students, our struggling students. SRD is significant reading deficient students and advanced learners. At the very bottom, you see the wide array of interventionists that we have available. So this is our special ed teacher, our CLD teacher, our Title I teacher, and so on. And you can see that in the middle is what we call our levels teacher, but really they're classroom teachers. and that our interventionists support the classroom teacher work as well as work directly in some cases with our focus students. This next graphic is our Interventionist Framework diamond. And, we've all seen the triangle for response to intervention, where at the bottom you see the universal, middle you see the tier 2 targeted type of intervention, and at the very top you would see the intensive intervention. Well, all this is two triangles on the side so that it includes the needs of our more advanced learners or our gifted and talented learners. Because after all, they too need some additional targeted and in some cases intensive support too. So that's what it describes, and it's all cloaked in instruction that is culturally relevant and responsive to student needs, particularly for our ELD students or CLD students, and it's also based on a very strengths-based model. Our interventionist framework has 6 essential components. I think when we first started, we had like 10 or 11. I don't even recall anymore. Well, we pared it down to these 6 that we felt were the most important. The first one being shared leadership. We can't just rely on the principals to do all this work. They already have 25 balls in there that they have to juggle. And in some schools, principals took this on. In other schools, we had teacher leaders take this on to support this type of work. So it was a shared leadership among anyone who was involved in their interventionist framework in the building. The second piece was the importance of blending services, which is the cross-pollination, that allowance or that permission given to schools to provide supports and services, to identify needs, but also to identify those other staff that have that talent to support those types of needs. Number 3 was the role flexibility. Our schools change on a daily basis at times, where we have kids coming in and kids moving out. It's a very highly mobile district. And so we need to allow our interventionists that role flexibility to address the needs as they come. And that's the component for number 3. Number 4 was on collaboration and planning and problem solving. That's utilizing a problem solving method to identify students that are focus students and to address their needs accordingly. Of course, to use data and to derive outcomes from the data and not just to say, well, I think this kid's improving, to actually show through data that this kid is improving or not improving and then responding as such. And of course, the last one is to use research-based instruction that we know or that has been externally validated to know that works. I highlighted items 2 and 3, as components 2 and 3, because those are sort of unique to the RTI literature that you see out there. But it's an important part, an important aspect of our interventionist framework. Here so far are our benefits. What I've done is to describe our Adams 50 paradigm on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side you see a more traditional paradigm. And this traditional paradigm is very generic. We know that there are a lot of traditional systems out there that are incredibly effective for our schools, but this is more of a generic list based on our experiences. And I won't go through every one of them. Maybe I'll just go over the orange ones there. And first of all, our paradigm is very collaborative, whereas the traditional paradigm tends to be a little bit more siloed. That we have an aligned curriculum instruction. That is, we are all working off the same curriculum, whether you're a specialist interventionist or if you're working as a general ed teacher. So there isn't any surprises by what is being taught to students who need that extra level of support, whether that be in a co-teaching, pull-in, or excuse me, a pull-out model or a push-in model. Whereas in a traditional paradigm, it's oftentimes very separate curriculum, very separate materials that are used in those cases. And sometimes it's necessary, but that seems to happen a lot more, I think, in a traditional-based system from our experience. Ours is very needs-driven. Traditional paradigms tend to be label-driven. What is that student's label? Is he a CLB student? Is she a special ed student, et cetera? And also, I didn't really get into this much, but really infusing personal social competencies are a very important aspect of what we're doing. They're not implied. We have to directly teach these personal social skills or these soft skills, quote unquote, because they're just as equally important as learning these academic skills. So what I'd like to do now is to introduce Dr. Sarah Gould, who's the principal at Hodgkins Elementary, and she can talk with you about how the Interventionist Framework is playing out in her building. Sarah?
Thank you, Steve, and I appreciate your background. Just some information on Hodgkins Elementary School. We are a school that serves approximately 665 students, preschool through 5th grade. We have 2 specialized learning centers, 2 of which are the district autism programs and 1 which is significant support needs. We are located in urban Denver area with high poverty. We have approximately 85% of our students are free and reduced, and our language acquisition population is approximately 55%. I have been the principal here now for 8 years, and in my first year, Hodgkins was labeled as a turnaround school, being one of the worst performing schools in the district and the state. Within the last 8 years, we've grown into an improvement plan and has had a steady increase in all content over the last 8 years, and we're proud to say that we are no longer turnaround and have not been for 7 years now. I'm not sure how to do this slide here. Perfect. So a background around who we serve. We really look at services based on individual student needs. So we might have a literacy interventionist, a Title I teacher with a special education background who works with students on a basic foundation of phonemic awareness. That small group might also have English language learners, students with disabilities, or impoverished students who are all needing that same specific strategy of phonemic awareness. Within that flexible group, data is then collected and a meeting occurs to determine the next step for the students. But because of our interventionist framework, no one is an island anymore. It's not about a Title I teacher or an ELD teacher. It's more about what the students need. And so we've come to this paradigm of more students are served at their individual needs level than ever before. And what is critical is the role of the general education teacher is to provide universal Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports as determined by our student support team, which I'll speak of in a minute. But those range from testing accommodations to differentiated small groups, and so they have a very clear partnership with our interventionists who serve on our team. So the blended service model at Hodgkins, we call our our support team an SST, student support team. So that's comprised of all of our interventionists who include special education, mental health, English language acquisition, Title I speech, and administration. We meet weekly in groups of the teachers' professional learning communities based on what they are submitting. And there's a submission process that general education teachers have to go through for students that they have concerns about. So what it is it's a discussion of individual students and their performance. So it's completely data-driven. What we do is, as a team, we determine next steps based on formative assessment data that's been collected typically on a 6-week data collection cycle. The majority of the data is collected by the general education teacher and the primary service providers dependent on the tier that the student is in. We determine the service provider based on scheduling, specific needs, and progression. It's not just about, well, this student qualifies for Title I, so they're going with the Title I specialist. It really is about what the specific skill is that they are teaching. And then that key information is tracked on a Google form, and so it's live and available for everyone to provide collaborative input and have a conversation on. What you'll be able to see next is a video of one of our student support team meetings, and you'll see just a clip of one of our special needs teachers along with some others that are collaborating and taking notes. But what you need to be aware of is there are all of who we talked about. There's about 12 individuals at the table that are also collaborating on the in the conversation, looking at what works for our students. So you'll go ahead and see that clip in just a moment.
87% accuracy, and her retell was, it was a yellow. Then it looks like, Nancy, you progress monitored her with 2 5th grade level, so 5th grade fluency 1, 5th grade passage 1, 5th grade passage 2. She was reading 79 words, and then she went down to 77 words, so on that 5th grade level passage. So it looks like because of her struggling with that, you went down to a grade 3. At a grade 3, she was able to read 96 words in a minute, 96% accuracy, and her retell was great. It's kind of looking over.
I do have a lot of 2nd grade on there too, because she had some phonic issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to see what phonics she needed help with, so that's why I went to a level 2.
Well, you can see you went back to the grade 2 passages,
right,
and it looks like she read those fairly well, yes. 99, 100% accuracy, but then she had a dip right before Christmas where she went down.
She was upset, thinking she was going to have to go back to Mexico. She kind of just, oh well. She shut down. Yeah. She just shut down and thought, oh well.
So I'm interested in seeing, I know we're doing mid-year benchmarking this week.
To see how she does.
I'm interested to see, so from the beginning of the year to now, with seeing me in a small group, seeing Ellen in a small group, and getting that 3rd group from you, has she made progress, or is our gap widening?
That's a lot of support.
She's she's never, been brought to SST before, and I know she's always gotten ELD support, but Nancy's been concerned since the beginning of the year, so we added that 3rd reading group. So I think a good next step, if we can, let's get her MOY done this week.
See where she's at.
Let's look at that, and then maybe we can even give her a progress monitoring at I'm thinking maybe a 2nd grade or a 3rd grade. We'll look and see what those scores come out as.
Okay.
And then we can make some next steps from there.
And so from that video, you saw that there was general education teachers there, interventionists, that really the label doesn't necessarily matter. It really is about the needs of the students. And then you'll also see interventionists that are paraprofessionals, so paraprofessionals that are delivering guided instruction specific to their area of training as well. The other piece that we think is critical is professional development for all licensed staff and paraprofessionals, and they have to have an understanding of the interventionist process. No one is able to wash their hands of responsibility to educate all of the students. So some of the professional development topics that have been completed for all of our staff include co-teaching, gap analysis, what a flexible group really looks like to be effective, executive functioning levels 1 and 2, and a really specific overall of what the student support team process looks like. General education's teachers' ability to analyze time on task behavior, and a very thorough overview of intervention tools and recording supports. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Chadwick Anderson, the principal at Scott Carpenter Middle School.
Thank you, Dr. Gould, and thanks EdWeek for this opportunity to highlight the Adams County School District 50 Interventionist Framework and how it works at Scott Carpenter Middle School. I'd like to say hi to everybody out there in Cyberland. First of all, one of the things that we talk about quite a lot at our school is the fact that everybody's an interventionist. More than half of our kids are performing below grade level, and the notion that special educators or Title I or ELD interventionists, CLD interventionists are going to pull them out and fix them, that's unaligned, it's archaic, and it's impractical. We need to all be on board to support the unique needs of all of our kids. So the flexibility, Dr. Sandoval talked about building level of flexibility around the most effective way to actualize the framework at each site. What we've seen, and what I'd like to highlight briefly, is the one aspect of the interventionist framework that's really showing some encouraging results at the middle school level is co-teaching. Now, some of the benefits in co-teaching, basically our interventionists are pushing in on a daily basis to our literacy classes or social studies classes or math classes in order to work shoulder to shoulder with our teachers, co-presenting, co-planning, pulling small groups in the regular classroom and just really delivering a quality product, instructional product for our students. And this co-teaching model allows our interventionists to model their best instructional practices and their strategies that they use to serve our most challenged learners, and those are modeled for the general education teachers, so that, to build capacity over time, those general education teachers will begin using those strategies because they've seen how effective they are with their own kids. Co-teaching also really fosters collaboration and collegiality at the school. There's an expectation that on a weekly basis, the co-teachers, interventionists, and their general ed co-teachers have a common plan time and time to sit down and co-plan and co-create their great lessons that they're delivering to our kids. Co-teaching also provides regular job-embedded professional development pretty much on a daily basis for our general ed teachers, like I mentioned earlier. Just modeling those strategies and having those really deep conversations and looking at student data with two lenses rather than working in a silo. So it's really good. And I know that Dr. Gould also mentioned the professional development aspects of our framework here in District 50. Co-teaching removes the stigma that was mentioned earlier by Dr. Sandoval of pull-out practices. Our challenged students are right there in the regular classroom with all the rest of the kids, and nobody really knows, why is that other lady in here? Well, it's a partnership, and it's not because they're, the kid doesn't feel targeted or stigmatized. It's just a natural flow of events. And I'm always happy to go and observe in the co-teaching classrooms and talk to the kids and say, look at how important your learning is to us, that I have this many adults. I'm in here, and then the interventionist and the teacher in here. We have 3 adults, and because your learning is that important. And kids really eat that stuff up. Another advantage of co-teaching is that it creates more leaders on my staff and resident experts in key topics, and it really builds that collegiality, like I already mentioned. So next slide, I can go like this and advance to the next slide. Watch me. Yeah, there we are. So one of my teachers, Amy Murray, who was a recent District 50 Teacher of the Year, fantastic lady, very, very dedicated, has this quote and that she talks about her co-teaching experience. And it says, "My experience with co-teaching has made me a more effective teacher. I learned new ways to differentiate and deliver instruction from my co-teacher during our time together in the class. And most importantly, our collaborative plan time. Co-teaching provided me with the opportunity to share my knowledge of history and my toolbox of instructional strategies and pair that with my co-teacher's knowledge of ELD learners and strategies. This pairing resulted in a classroom full of successful students." So she's a recognized leader throughout the district, fantastic lady, like I said, and totally bought into the program just like all of the other staff here at Scott Carpenter Middle School. So in sum, just around co-teaching, it's really helped Scott Carpenter turn perennial low performance around. The collaboration and consistency in instructional delivery brought about by these co-teaching partnerships has been a real key factor in bringing a culture of performance to our school. So at this time, I'd like to get back with our main presenter, Dr. Steve Sandoval.
Well, thanks, Chad, and we certainly have come a long way, I think, in developing this work over really the last 7 years or so, and we've gained a lot of wisdom, in terms of implementing something really this big and systemic across the district. As educational leaders, sometimes we wish we had that rewind button so that we kind of go back and do some things differently, and really this is no different. Had we had that luxury, these are some things that I think we would do probably a little bit differently. The first one being that we articulate the vision at the onset. I think we had values set in terms of how we wanted to go about doing things, but we really didn't set a vision for a couple of years after that in 2010. And I think setting that early at the onset would have been more important, making sure we were communicating that to all groups so they know exactly what we're doing, what we're about. Also, this is important, strive for fidelity in terms of your interventionist framework and how you do things, not necessarily consistency, which I think is, as you heard from Chad and Sarah, they conceptualize the interventionist framework somewhat differently, and that's okay. So long as those 6 essential components are applied, that's what's most important. But how the principal leads those components within their building based on their unique needs is absolutely most important. We talked about first best instruction. I tell you, if I could rewind time, we put our eggs into that basket. Our focus initially was how we address the needs of focus students, Tier 2 and Tier 3 kids. And, 90% of our conversation was about that, and probably just 10% was about universal. And I think if we were to do it all over, we'd really kind of switch the conversation, or at least balance the conversation between universal versus Tier 2 and Tier 3. Also to demystify techniques. Oh my gosh, I can't work with that kid. She's too, behaviorally disordered, or, special ed, or poor, or whatever that may be. And the reality is it really comes down to good teaching and having great relationships with kids, first and foremost. Also, what's important is what ain't inspected, ain't respected. And so we have an interventionist leadership team that visits every school twice during the year to meet with the interventionist teams and their principals to talk about, not to police, but really to talk about their process, their interventions, their problem-solving model, and to help kind of guide their work. Don't fear the flexibility. We're getting increased flexibility to braid or blend funds together between special programs or federal programs. There's an allowance there that probably didn't exist, years ago, and you don't be afraid to start looking into doing that. Of course, no one does this alone. We have to do this collaboratively and at all levels, including our director level, certainly our principals, teachers, and everybody. And also anyone who has this sense of silo thinking. It's a comfort zone for a lot of people. We really don't want those folks applying for our positions, because it really takes a truly collaborative thinking person to do this work and to make it go effectively. So that's all we have today. We appreciate the time we spent with you, and this is probably a good time to ask any questions that you have at this point in time.
Thank you, guys. Let's go to a few that we've already got in the queue. I've had several who have been asking for some of the more structural nuts and bolts of what you're doing, particularly in, for example, what's the legal meaning of interventionist, and how do you deal with certain students who need very specific supports, like deaf or hard of hearing students, in terms of making sure you have what's required by law?
That's a great question. In fact, our interventionist framework isn't completely a kumbaya approach. I think originally we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we did, and kind of banish all these other programs so that we create such a great universal system to meet the needs of all kids. And, that may be a vision 20 years down the road, perhaps, but currently it's not that, again, kumbaya type of mentality. We know that, we still have to provide special services, and in that regard, in some cases, we do offer very traditional services in that regard, especially for those kids that require that high level of specialization, like you had mentioned, the deaf and hard of hearing students. We still have learning centers, and I think you heard Dr. Gould talk about her learning centers at Hodgkins and at Scott Carpenter, in fact, that were specifically created to address the needs of our most highly impacted students, like our students with autism spectrum disorder. Now, these centers will not go away, but it doesn't mean that these students within these centers cannot gain from some integrative activities that happen throughout the day. Our goal, again, as best as we can, is really to match our programs and services as flexibly as possible to meet the vast array of needs, whatever that may be, and it's a vast continuum that we have. And I think we're accomplishing that. I think we're getting there. I don't think we're there for sure, but I think we're getting there in that regard.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got stakeholders and particularly faculty who came up in a siloed model to adapt to this, and how you worked on the more resistant faculty members? This is primarily for the two principals.
It really, thinking back on when we first implemented the CBS system and we started the Interventionist Framework, I don't recall getting a lot of pushback. It just seemed to make a lot of sense to these people. And I mean, of course, always change is a little bit difficult, and, you have to walk people through things and give them small digestible chunks, but I don't recall there being a real push against this concept because it just made too much sense for our kids.
And I would agree. I think, just communicating to teachers and to parents and students that we're going to meet you where you're at and provide the support based on what you need, not based on the levels or not based on the labels that we have for ourselves, but about the specific skill that you need support around.
Dr. Gould, was the data in the video created from teacher data systems or assessments like DIBELS or AIMSweb?
They're both. So on the iPad, when the one teacher was speaking, the interventionist, she was looking at MClass, so DIBELS, I would assume progress monitoring. And then the other data that was spoken of is data that was collected by interventionists that are working with the students, as well as what teachers are observing through formative and anecdotal notes and assessments within class based on that 6-week monitoring cycle.
Could you guys talk a little bit about how you created within the structure of your school day and week the collaborative time necessary for teachers to do all of this data reviewing and team planning?
Do you want to talk about that, Chad? Or?
Sure, I can. We, at the middle school level, we switched our schedule up, and we have two basic, we have a STEM team, our science and mathematics, and our humanities team, which is social studies and literacy or language arts. And so we were able to finagle the schedule so that our interventionists, the co-teachers, the people who have an interventionist pushing into their classroom had that common plan time with their general ed teacher. And then I've asked for them to submit to me a template, just to make sure that the collaboration is taking place. I also like to see the lesson plans and the result of their common planning. And we've been able to use some online, some electronic tools to facilitate that, so it's not a lot of extra work for those teachers.
Where within this framework is family engagement, particularly when you've got a whole bunch of different teachers working with a student, and special education students might be used to a set IEP team. Is there still an IEP team, and how do you involve parents?
You want to go there?
Maybe I just kind of introduce it, is, from a district perspective first. And if we do have an Achilles heel as a district, it's really that level of family engagement system-wide when it comes to this type of work, and it's very important work, and we're always thinking of ways to improve parent engagement. But we do have pockets of, I think, really excellent family engagement, and in fact, two of the principals are among the best in terms of getting their parents involved. And so maybe, Sarah, if you want to talk, and Chad, if you want to talk about how you get your parents involved, I think that would be useful.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is all students have what's called a data notebook. So students themselves are also tracking their progress over time, both on social, emotional, and academic success and goal setting. And so those data notebooks and progress are shared on a weekly basis with parents through their Thursday take-home folders, as well as student-led conferences. And we have found that increased parent buy-in, collaboration, and participation, it can't come from the adults in the building. It has to come from empowering the students to have a voice. And as we've gone through this blended service, we've been able to really teach students to advocate for themselves and empower themselves through understanding what their specific academic strengths are and what their goals are, and being able to articulate that to their parents and share their successes with their parents. No matter how small or large it is, it's a success. So a lot of that had to be a paradigm for children, that this isn't just a traditional model of your teacher hands out a report card to the parent and meets with the parent with or without the child. So children being able to articulate their needs transformed into parents getting more of that information through that child, and that really has increased. And then with the parent nights that we have on a monthly basis, really focusing on student strengths and programming and making sure that representatives from our interventionist team are there welcoming families and talking about the successes that they've had with the children.
Thanks. We'll have to end it there. If you want to learn more, you can join us to meet Steve and some of the other leaders to learn from at a live event this March 11th. Also, we'd like to remind you, if you'd like to watch today's presentation again, an on-demand archive will be made available through edweek.org in the next 24 hours. You can also visit edweek.org to find articles that explore today's topic in a little more depth. Thank everyone. Thank you for attending, and my thanks to our friends at Adams 50.
It was our pleasure. Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was big fun. Thanks.